Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation sponsored by the Society of Decision Professionals, which is an SDP-sponsored showcase webinar by Strategic Decisions Group. It is entitled Accelerating the Journey to Decision Quality with Distracted and Dispersed Teams, with an overview of successful applications at Whiting Petroleum. I would now like to introduce you to the speakers you'll be hearing from today. Our featured speakers are Carl Spetzler, Jennifer Meyer, and Chris Edwards. Carl Spetzler is an author, speaker, and business leader with more than 40 years of experience helping top management and corporate boards grapple with strategic decision-making under uncertainty. Carl, welcome to today's Learning Exchange.
My pleasure, thank you.
Our next featured speaker is Jennifer Meyer. She is an author and consultant who specializes in guiding clients through difficult decisions that require technically complex analysis and organizationally complex alignment processes. Jennifer, welcome to today's Learning Exchange.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Our guest speaker is Chris Edwards. Chris is Vice President of Exploration and Geoscience for Whiting Petroleum and has vast experience across the full spectrum of the oil field lifecycle. Chris, welcome to today's Learning Exchange.
Good morning, thank you.
Our moderator for today's presentation is Charles Persinger. Charles is a Senior Research Advisor for Portfolio Strategy and Decision Sciences at Eli Lilly. He has over 15 years of experience consulting with teams and decision makers across Lilly and on complex and challenging drug development decisions. Charles, welcome to today's Learning Exchange.
Thank you, Brig.
Charles will facilitate your questions throughout the presentation and raise some to our speakers to address live during and at the end of the webinar. And now, without any further delay, I'd like to turn today's presentation over to one of our speakers, Carl Spetzler. Carl, you have the floor.
Thank you, Brig. So today's discussion will be on accelerating the journey to DQ with distracted and dispersed teams. We'll be talking about some applications at Whiting Petroleum. And the agenda is pretty straightforward. We'll first have a quick introduction by myself. Then we'll talk about the specific approaches at Whiting Petroleum. Jennifer will take you through some examples of using templates in a platform that is called PowerNoodle. And then we'll talk, at the end, I'll come back and talk a little bit about the broader implications to the decision professional of these kinds of changes and trends that are occurring. Everyone is familiar with our standard chart that we have put in the public domain as SDG, I think maybe 5 years ago, because it has gotten so much use. And that really talks about the two kinds of challenges, those that are of analytical complexity that kind of hurt the mind, and those that are of human complexity or organizational complexity due to the fact that people have human natures and different points of view and different behaviors, and there's ever more pressure on that left side dimension. Today's webinar is really pretty much about that left side, that dimension of how do we deal with the kind of pressures that are coming on with organizational complexity. And I'd like to start off right away with a poll. And in this poll, you can select any and all of those pressures if you face them. Decision makers demanding faster decision cycles, needing more engagement of more decision participants because of more collaboration being demanded, participants demanding fewer and more efficient meetings. There's a lot of negative on meetings, and then in-person meetings for dispersed teams are very costly and difficult to get. Especially if people are in different continents, and we often find cross-functional organizations and cross-business unit participation required for significant decisions and strategic decisions. And then participants, when they are on online and virtual meetings, are multitasking and you have no idea whether they're really attending or just doing their email. And so please vote and select as many as you like that fit for you. I think the polls are now coming in, and I give you one more minute here. And now let's publish the polls, please. So what we see is every one of those. They seems like each one is a hit, and we have everyone that feels those kinds of pressures. Well, those types of pressures became something that we found to be a major issue as we kept looking at what we called everyday significant decisions. And I'll just tell you a moment about the journey we went through. So we started about 18 months ago. In fact, I gave a webinar on everyday significant decisions, but this research at SDG has gone on for now 3 years, where we're trying to find a way to be effective and bring decision quality to decisions that don't necessarily have a decision professional supporting them, because they are in that domain where the decision makers and the people around the table or online have to have enough understanding of decision quality to be able to do it. And to be able to do that well, we kept asking ourselves, what kind of emerging collaboration technology could help with this? And the cross-organizational requirements and the decision culture questions that were partially reflected in the pressures we all feel were at the heart of all of this. Well, our search over time led us to a program platform that's called PowerNoodle. And we found that not only does it help with everyday significant decisions, but it really becomes a tool that we use in the strategic decision world as well. And that's why we're presenting this to decision quality professionals. So this led us to PowerNoodle, and let me tell you a little bit about what got us there. First, there was the whole search through all these different collaboration and decision-making platforms, and another one seems to be coming up every week. As we tested them and checked them out, one of the early conclusions we came to is that self-managed platforms can't get us there. So those tools that basically had a guidance system built inside, let's think of this as the decision quality consultant as an AI application, they either became too constraining and therefore simplistic, or they were relatively universal, in which case the participants had to guide themselves, and that led to a lot of circular chat and just didn't converge, and it led to significant frustration relatively quickly, where people said, it's not going anywhere. And what we realized is that, in fact, these platforms would have to become too complex to be able to become universal. A good decision consultant takes advantage of the nature of the problem to guide us to a solution that makes it much simpler than if it were a universal problem with everything being a concern, okay? And so I think that led us to the next point, which is really, we need an active facilitator at the center. Now, the active facilitator doesn't have to be a fully trained decision professional. They can be a, let me say, the type of facilitator that we often see in meetings in many organizations. But you need somebody that understands people and where they are, and understands, most of all, what's the right question to ask next? Where do we have to go next? And it has to, in addition to that, we found, to be very simple to use by the participants. Now, for the facilitator, it ends up being complex because of this universality. So the facilitator has to have significant training and skill to be able to guide the process well. But everybody that participates needs to just be able to get in without any real training and a 3-minute explanation or email invitation and be able to participate. And that led us to a program or a platform that is called PowerNoodle. It was the closest fit that we found so far. It is an emerging program. It's an early stage company, Canadian company, that has come up with this platform. And we have tested it enough now to have built some confidence. There's still plenty of challenges as we go into this emerging skill capability with a good platform. And for that reason, SDG has formed a strategic alliance with PowerNoodle to support its use for decision quality and have influence on the development roadmap and constantly improve our own skills and be able to deploy it in virtual consulting client meetings, which tends to be something that we need increasingly, and it becomes a bigger part of our business. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to Jennifer. Tell us about how you're using it.
Thank you, Carl. So when I first saw PowerNoodle, I just became really excited about what it would enable me as a decision professional to do in helping our clients reach decision quality. And so we started thinking about, for the decision professional and for our clients, what is it that we would expect to accomplish by using a platform like PowerNoodle? One thing that had become pretty clear is that we continually needed to find ways to engage a broader group of people. We're finding that perspectives and information are spread more and more broadly across organizations. And one way to facilitate bringing together those perspectives is to do something with online engagement. And that allows us also to reach people that are in various locations throughout the organization. So we want to think about that notion of increasing the participation, but we also were excited about the opportunities that PowerNoodle provides for improving productivity and efficiency by doing online activities that are asynchronous, that is, people doing those things on their own time. We can solicit input and facilitate discussions outside of meetings, allowing the participants to choose when they contribute to those discussions. And that allows us to be much more efficient when we do have meetings. And you'll hear some examples of how we chose to do that in a few specific cases. And we also found that by using some of these electronic tools, for example, the strategy table,
Jennifer,
yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I can no longer see your screen. I'm wondering whether the rest of the audience may have the same problem. Can you double check that your screen sharing is still on?
Let's see. Okay,
yeah, there we are.
Does that
Perfect.
help?
Yes,
Right.
thank you.
Okay, good. So and having the screen share does improve productivity and efficiency. So thank you. So in terms of facilitating those online activities that people can do on their own time, that enables us to be much more efficient when we are getting people together, whether it's live or virtually. And we also find these tools are really effective in creating an immediate documentation of what we actually accomplished in the meeting. So for example, when we create a strategy table, we can do it online. We can have people participate remotely as well as in the room, and we've got an instant record of where we've been. So those are objectives that we had for our engagement with our clients and what we were hoping to accomplish. And recently we had the opportunity to engage with Whiting Petroleum, and there were some opportunities here that we thought might be a good way to showcase a number of the things that we're finding with several of our clients. Recently, Whiting has had some new leadership come into place, and that leadership team was ready to set a new direction. And in the spirit of becoming leaders for this new organization, these leaders didn't want to dictate the direction. They wanted actually to engage a broad group of team members actively in coming up with the new direction, but they wanted to do that without overwhelming everybody with tons and tons of meetings. And as you might find, typically timelines were tight, but still the leaders wanted to be sure that they were embodying the cultural practices that they wanted to see going forward, with inclusivity and open communication being a part of that discussion. So we found this to be a good candidate for trying a new approach. And whereas we might have started with just a couple of framing and alternatives workshops for a small group of people, instead we recommended that Whiting take a little bit more time using a timeline of 2 weeks to use PowerNoodle to get started on the strategy discussion, and that would allow us to engage a broader group and also be more effective in the meetings that we did have. And I want to say a special thanks to Chris Edwards, whom you're going to hear from next, for sharing his perspectives on how it went. We had some objectives. We'll be eager to hear Chris's perspective on how that came together. Over to you, Chris.
Okay, good morning. Can we skip ahead to the next page? I thought I would start with who I am and what this change at Whiting has meant. And this isn't to stroke my own ego. There's a point at the end, so bear with me. But I'm a scientist, and over the last decade have become a manager steeped in a servant leadership-oriented methodology and philosophy. And that's part of the reason why I've been brought over to Whiting. Our CEO has that very same philosophy. And so our tenets and the way we've redirected this company to be led is one that emphasizes culture, and it's acknowledging that you've hired a brilliant and talented staff. Why don't we trust them and stretch them and listen to them? And requiring your leaders be able to check every box: interpersonal, business, and technical skill. And why it matters today is that this was a fairly radical departure from the leadership philosophy of Whiting in the past. And I'm not placing a judgment, a right or a wrong on it. But what we have is a staff in place, quite talented, who are quite accustomed to a different leadership methodology. And so it turned out, to my surprise, I guess, the PowerNoodle became a pretty useful tool as we made this transition in how we plan to lead the organization and how we want to evolve the culture within the company. So next slide talks about how we push the reset button within the exploration organization and focus pretty heavily on 3 planks. There's a culture of ownership, which Jennifer helped mention, where if you've brought this kind of talent in, let's use their creative thoughts to help shape the direction. It also helps build ownership. If they were a part owner in setting the direction, I feel like we get a better answer at the end of the day. We're also in this transition from somewhat solo work to building more of a team concept. And that's everything from the initial interpretation of an idea to peer reviewing it amongst your friends to build support, make the answer stronger. A second plank is prioritizing our work focus. We're a lean, mean company, and that means the entire U.S. cannot be our purview if we want to deliver the quality and success rate that we need. So we're going to have to define focus areas. And then third would be renovating the organization, and part of this bigger cultural shift that we're leading. And one click ahead shows that as I looked back upon the planks, PowerNoodle actually had an effect on each one of them along the way. And what it did was create an efficient environment where we can receive candid input from an org that wasn't maybe completely accustomed or comfortable to offering full-on candid feedback on what their thoughts were. So the tool came in as a safe place to offer that. It also, since it's written, you have a chance to gather your thoughts and express it as cleanly as you would like, rather than sometimes verbally on the spot. You can't quite convey the message you intended. So it was helpful there too. Next slide. When it talks about focus for us, we have a staff of about 30. And we've decided we will explore, so I'm happy for that. That all pretty much means the U.S. is our playground. We begin to think about stacking the deck in our favor. What are we good at? What regions of the country would that imply that we ought to spend our time on? We'll do an initial economic screening to understand of those regions, which plays within the region deserve a longer-term study. That moves us into building the investment case and all the alternative ways to enter the plays that make the cut for us. And then we finally reach an investment point on the right side of the slide. And so we've worked down this funnel. And as we've walked through this process over the last few months, on the next click, you'll see that, again, we used PowerNoodle to our advantage, especially in the upfront, to kind of understand with the team, what's our vision? What do we even want to be? What are the issues that kind of stand in our way? What are givens? Are we an oil company? Are we a gas company and oil company? Do you want to play in environments that are regulatorily inhibitive for competition to come into? Things like that. We're able to have a real conversation about who Whiting is through the tool. That's helped us identify the focus areas, which then we categorized, usually on a risk profile. What kind of risk? You swing home runs, swing at balls that could be home runs. You're going to miss a lot of them. Is that home run every once in a while worth it? Is that the kind of success rate that the company needs? So we're able to debate that. What metrics do we measure success on? And every company is a little bit different. What's neat about the oil industry is we transitioning from this growth is the way we attract investors to free cash flow, and efficiency of a return on a dollar is more rewarded by the market. And so you're seeing our metrics change. And as we compare projects, it's important then to know which metrics actually matter before we go and invest. So the tool is useful in gathering input from 30 people rather than myself and my CEO dictating our understanding, and I think you get a better answer that way. I believe the next slide is my final. I'm happy to converse with anyone along the way here. And one more click. Screening, I thought, was a fun topic to talk about. It was a big part of our focus effort, and we spent about a month taking all these areas we had foundational knowledge and screening them. And what you have to do is take shortcuts. If you're going to invest a month, what you get is a screening level of knowledge, not an investment grade level of knowledge, what I would call it. We have to decide what projects are worth building in the investment level of knowledge in. PowerNoodle, again, wound up being useful in gathering commercial terms, which is a big part of the valuation for us. For every barrel of oil we produce, how many dollars does it take to get it into a pipe and then get it down that pipe to a refinery, and how much are they charging us? So we're able to gather all these key inputs online through a tool that avoided probably what would have been a couple of hours of meetings. And that's just one example of many. And then a final piece that was really important to me in understanding the quality of an investment is peer review and risking. And we weren't able to do that in screening mode because we're rapidly advancing at a pace that kind of eliminates the ability to do that. So what we did instead was open up the Noodle to this group of 30 people and say, here's a project. You got to say everything you like about it, everything you think we're exposed on that you may not like about it. And in a way, it was a rapid and really candid way to gather peer review quality feedback on potential future investments without what would normally be probably a week's worth of process. And I think that built some credibility into the answers we brought to the executive team on where we're about to invest our time. I think that wraps it up for me. Happy to take questions in a moment if anyone has any.
So, Chris, this is Charles. A couple questions while you're talking about your experiences at Whiting Petroleum. First, you talked about your the sort of leadership approach, the servant-oriented leadership approach. Perspectives from you on the use of PowerNoodle and the approach to this situation, and how PowerNoodle might have either helped or enabled that perspective from the servant-oriented leadership? Did it sort of reiterate the approach that you were wanting and expecting from leadership, as well as then how do you think this approach might be beneficial with other leadership styles, such as an autocrat style?
Ah, man, I like the second part of that question. That's fun. I think to the first part, it really dovetailed nicely into the kind of the new leadership philosophy that your input is welcome and valued. When it comes to autocratic leadership, I would recommend anyone humble enough to bring the tool in-house, use it, regardless of your leadership style. There are two sides to that coin, though. If you ask people for input, you better be willing to discuss it and debate it, and be prepared to embrace alternative opinions and then follow up with people on them. And that's where I think an autocrat might look like they're open to it, but the proof is in the pudding with what you actually do with the inputs afterwards.
Okay, thanks. And one other question related to your experiences, both sort of the quality of what you got out, as well as the efficiency that you got to the final product. Can you speak to your thoughts on how PowerNoodle and the approach led to maybe higher quality, whether it's additional inputs you wouldn't have expected, or engaging more people, as well as then sort of assume that this helped with that efficiency of getting to more timely answers with less people's time?
If I were to reword your question, since the alternative would have been autocratic, Chris Edwards sets the strategy alone, did we do better than I would have done by myself? And I can say humbly, yes. You can't take that many talented people and put them in a room and not come up with something differentially better. And that's
great. So
part of the leadership.
Go ahead.
Part of our leadership, servant leadership mantra is you probably ought not be the best technical person in the room. If you're the manager, you probably ought to have hired many people to fill that role. And then I think if you do that, you probably ought to listen to.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. So we were really excited to have the chance to work with Whiting in the context of using PowerNoodle for these framing and alternatives workshops, and also moving ahead into the screening discussions that Chris mentioned. From the perspective of a decision professional, using something like PowerNoodle requires a real shift of thinking, and that creates some real opportunities that are pretty unique. And I wanted to share with you a couple examples of the templates that we have created within SDG that we got to put into practice in our work with Whiting. We've used them with other clients as well, but Whiting was this perfect little microcosm of lots of different tools that we got to apply. So I'm going to show you a couple of those. One of the things that we did early on, before we even engaged with the group at Whiting, is we sat down with Chris and put together a description of the vision statement for the effort. And many of you use this approach. We're answering questions like, what are we going to do? Why are we doing it? And why now? How will we know if we're successful? Well, once we had a draft of that vision statement, we were able to use PowerNoodle to get comments from people before the kickoff workshop. And I'm actually going to open up PowerNoodle. You'll see a screen image here that's just kind of illustrating the kinds of things that you can do with it. Let me actually flip over to PowerNoodle and show you this live. So here we are now in a decision space within PowerNoodle where you can see I've got these 4 tiles that have questions in them. What are we going to do? Why are we doing it? How will we know if we're successful? How might we fail? The way that we use this is we actually put into the description here the answers to these questions, and then we invite people to comment on them. And if people, we've got instructions over here on the left telling people what it is we'd like them to do. And then we, when we're asking them to comment, all they have to do is click on this little speech bubble, and they are presented with a tile where they can see the content of what's actually been described, and they can add a comment and post it. And then we can actually have replies. We can have a series of discussions going on. And when we've done this with clients, we actually got we can get really good input in advance. Working with the Whiting team, we had on the order of 15 to 20 comments on each one of these questions, and that enabled us to come up with a revised vision statement right at the beginning of the process. We could revise the vision statement before we even jumped into the first workshop. So that's one example of how we've used PowerNoodle. It's pretty simple, but it's great because we can do it offline, people doing it on their own time, and we've got lots of stuff to work with before we actually get into the context of the meetings themselves. So it's great input. And another way to solicit input is to think about issue raising, right? We all do issue raising at the beginning of the project. I'm going to show you now an example from a case study that we use in one of our courses. So the content here does not reflect the work that we did with Whiting, but you can see, for example, we set this up, we've got instructions over here on the left-hand side that say, what are the issues that you're concerned about? We give a little background about what we mean by an issue, and then we give specific examples about how to add an idea. And also we encourage people to make comments and come back frequently as people add new things. If I want to add an idea, all I have to do is click on the tile here, and I can quickly put in something, and it'll pop up on the list. And it's a great way for people to start brainstorming the kinds of things they're worried about. So in this case, you'll see examples of things like which markets should we focus on? We should sell now. This particular case is an example of a business that's not doing very well with a particular product, and they're trying to decide what to do about that particular product and the facility that they've been using to create it. So lots of things come up about, should they sell now? Should they look into outsourcing? There are issues with morale at the plant. Who is it that's in charge of PR? And I'm sure you'll recognize these kinds of issues. When we do issue raising at the beginning of a project, we come up with lots and lots and lots of different ideas. And with the group at Whiting, we had 76, I think, issues suggested initially. Gave us a great opportunity to make sure that we were thinking comprehensively about the topics that were going to be relevant when we were working on strategy. So this brainstorming approach was really effective, and of course we had people commenting too. If someone had proposed something, someone else might say, hey, I have a different opinion about that. I don't think this is really something we should be worrying about. We can have lots of those dialogues happening in these comment boxes as we're continuing this process. So great way to get ideas on the table before we start. We had a very short time frame in the work that we did with Whiting in preparation for that first framing workshop, and yet we got really good participation in a span of just a couple of days. Sometimes it takes a little longer to get groups engaged and getting them to participate, but the insights that we get from having issue raising done before that first meeting, we can really improve the effectiveness of what we're doing with the team once we get in there. And one of our other clients had the experience of being in a situation to pull together 3 different groups that hadn't previously worked together. And so this was going to be an opportunity for them to share issues across these different groups. And that allowed the facilitator to actually do quite a bit of planning once these issues had been identified, to think carefully about how can we use the time in the live meeting most efficiently, and also what additional information should we gather before we meet to make sure that we're as effective as possible when we get together. So issue raising, it gets a lot of things on the table, and you might wonder, well, okay, what else can you do once you've got them identified? So another task in terms of a standard decision professional's bag of tricks is we might say, well, let's take all those ideas and figure out what kind of issue they are. You might recognize these standard tags. We've got decisions, uncertainties, we've got other, and what we allow, once we've got these issues in here, I can actually click on a tile. This one says we need presence in the European market, which is growing twice as fast as the US market in this little manufacturing example. Well, that's actually tied to a pretty important decision. And I can actually choose, here's my set of tags that I can allow participants to use. And I, as the facilitator, I get to define these tags in whatever way I want, so that I can make this really detailed, or I can make it pretty general. In this case, I just used tags to classify as decision, uncertainty, value, or other, as you might suggest, or as you might know from the work that you do as a decision professional. So that tagging is pretty nice, and allows us to, for example, if I take a look at, if I sort these so that I can see how many I have in each category, I've got quite a few decisions here, got a few uncertainties. I don't have very many things that related to process or facts, and I have a couple I haven't yet categorized here. This is a great way to do a check before I move forward with the team to say, hey, do we have a good set of representation of uncertainties? Or actually, there's nothing in here that's about values. So let's do some brainstorming about values before we move on to the next piece. And we can actually do this live. Chris mentioned that getting a good understanding about metrics for Whiting was an important piece. We did a Power Noodle brainstorming on those metrics as part of a meeting. We had people divide up into pairs and triples, and they actually input their brainstorm list of values and metrics in the meeting so that we could pretty quickly identify places where we had good alignment and what things might be missing. And of course, once again, we have a meeting record. As soon as we're done, we have a resource where people can actually look at the ideas that have been suggested. So this kind of tagging can help us get a sense for the quality of the inputs that we have and what additional information we need. And once we're pretty comfortable with that, you might guess, well, what do we do next? The next task is to figure out about the decision hierarchy. And in fact, this is something else we can do. Once I've got all the decisions identified, I can export those decisions to another workspace where I can actually work with a different set of tags here. And now you can see my tags are given, focus on, and decide later separately. So I can instantly create a visual of the decision hierarchy from the tiles that we just looked at from it in the context of the issue raising and checking for quality. So I can very quickly do the things that I would normally do with flip charts and Post-its on the walls and things like that. It's a much more effective way to deal with teams that we might have someone who's dialing in from another part of the country. And that actually was something that we dealt with in Whiting. And of course, that happens more and more these days with our clients, that we have to be able to deal with people who are not actually in the room. So this is a big step forward in terms of being able to engage those folks. And it really has an impact on my thinking as a facilitator. How can I leverage these tools so that I can get better engagement with the people in the room as well as the people outside of the room, and have a higher quality work product as a function of having done that? It really, I've been using Power Noodle pretty extensively for about a year now, and I'm still finding new ways that it will improve what I'm able to do with my clients and the project teams that I work with. There is one other thing that you might guess. What happens after we have the focus on decisions? Well, we are going to need next to move into the realm of creating a strategy table. And we've actually worked with PowerNoodle to help develop an approach for doing a strategy table as part of PowerNoodle. So we can actually do brainstorming about, now we've got our decisions across the top here. So we can very naturally go from the brainstorming of those focus on decisions into populating the columns that end up at the top of the strategy table. Then we can do separate brainstorming activities to figure out what options should we consider under product improvement. Here we've got none, incremental R&D, full funding of a product redesign effort. These can all be done in brainstorm sessions that are done in parallel within a group, or it can be done offline, a variety of different things. We also can do a separate kind of brainstorming with what are the themes that we should be thinking about here. And we've got a nice way to integrate all of that within PowerNoodle. It's very easy once we've got those structures in place to actually string a strategy and come up with a new one. I'm going to add a new strategy here so you can see kind of how this works. I'm going to add a new strategy here. I'm going to call this one Outsource to Mexico. And if I'm going to do some outsourcing, so all I had to do was just quickly add that. Now I've got a new color to use here. Well, if I'm going to outsource to Mexico, the product improvement is something that needs to be done incrementally so that we can support our partner. I'm going to go ahead and close the plant, given that we're going to be having this Mexico partner produce what we're doing. That'll enable us to do a big push for marketing within the US because they'll be easily able to serve that market. And I'm not going to do any other buying or selling of a competitor or a business unit. So you can see I can very quickly create from the brainstorming that I've done in different aspects, a strategy table to represent the work that we've done so far. So those are just a couple of examples of things that we have found to be really effective and efficient with PowerNoodle and allow us to engage very effectively with dispersed teams and teams that don't have a lot of times for meetings. We also have done things like surveying an organization to see what the quality of the decisions they make is, how their decision quality is perceived. We have examples where we actually survey folks to understand their perspectives on what dysfunctional decision behaviors exist within the organization. We can use it for capturing reasons why one of our uncertainties might come out to be higher or lower, which is an important part of probability assessment. Lots of different ways that we can use PowerNoodle and do our job as decision professionals more effectively and efficiently. So that's kind of a quick overview. I'm going to pass it back to Carl now to talk more about some other broader implications for the decision professional.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I think people already get the idea that all the things we normally do, where we both have divergent, that is getting many inputs, and then convergent, trying to sort it and prioritize and rate and value and get it down to where we gain agreement around something. That process happens a lot. And really what I think the key is back to, you've got to ask the right question. You've got to send it in the right direction. That doesn't just happen from the program. That still takes an experienced and capable facilitator and leader. The way I see it being used, sometimes it's the actual management leader, like someone like Chris, that would have an internal assistant that manages more the administration within the PowerNoodle, and they may be the in the moment facilitator, or it is actually easy enough to use that key leaders that want to get their hands dirty directly want to become the facilitators and have their own license. What I found particularly useful about the PowerNoodle business model was that it was a license to the facilitator and the facilitator could use it as frequently with as many people as they wanted to, and there are no other entry requirements for a participant. You don't have to download anything. You don't have to get a license for anybody that participates. It's just per facilitator license. And so for us, this has become an interesting tool to be able to reach out. We are able to engage dispersed teams, and that allows us now to achieve decision quality in these everyday significant decisions. And very often when someone has one of those, what makes them difficult is they're cross-functional with people in all kinds of places, and that with the inefficiencies or the cost of engaging people without a tool like this, we engage fewer people and less often, and we have meetings. Well, meetings by nature, to go well, is everybody listens and one person talks. So it's a serial process where PowerNoodle gives us the ability to have a parallel process and do it rapidly and share, and it can be done on what we call our own time. So you can think before you get together and have some of that done, and the more expensive together time becomes more efficient. So the whole thing has been a work, the way we work, a shift in that. And it's a different medium. At first, it takes a while to get used to it. I recall when we went from transparencies to PowerPoint, and until we really got feeling comfortable in the PowerPoint world, there are lots of things you could do in transparencies you couldn't do in PowerPoint. And you had to learn a new medium. Well, this is a new medium, and it's a medium for engagement and collaboration. So since we need this, where does this take us? I think as decision professionals, we have been on the edge of going from serving organizations primarily only on strategic decisions to expanding and making decision quality an integrated part of these everyday significant decisions. Well, this lowers the cost of facilitation and creates additional outreach. And I really think the core to an organization's decision culture is not just adopting a decision dialogue process for the strategic decisions, but having every executive that is in the decision-making process being able to judge the quality of a decision against the 6 dimensions and do at least a quick gap evaluation of, are we there yet, and what else do we need to do? I think this kind of improvement in technology and platform gives us an additional way of getting at those ESDs. And I think that's where the big culture change occurs. So that's where I think it fits into our profession, and I hope you all consider improving your competencies in that direction. We have one final poll here that we'd like to get your input on. If this intrigues you, you have the freedom to get a copy of today's slides, get more of these specific applications. If you want to have more on applications for strategy tables or collaboration tools, or you'd like to schedule a general PowerNoodle demo, all of that can be available either through SDG or our strategic ally here in this PowerNoodle itself. And I think we're ready for additional questions, Charles, that might have come up during this session.
Certainly, Carl, and we have a number of questions online. We'll hopefully get to as many of them as we can. If not, we'll try to get to some of them offline. First, we had some questions around, there's a lot of conversation around using this in framing an alternative generation. Can you talk about the use or not use of this in things like expert assessments, getting assessments on uncertainties, as well as then towards the end of a decision on whether it's communicating the decision or documenting the decision that gets made.
Jennifer, would you want to answer that?
Okay, yeah, a couple thoughts about the challenge of doing good probability assessments. We know that one of the ways that we want to be sure to not have people be too anchored is to have them do brainstorming on reasons why something might be really good or really bad or high or low in the context of whatever the numerical value is. And it's interesting to imagine, you know, when we typically do these kinds of assessments, it's one or two people in the room and we're writing some things down on the flip charts. Here's the things that might be high, here's the things that might be low. Well, now we can actually engage a broader group to think about things that might drive reasons for high or reasons for low. And we can have that actually done before we come to talk with the expert. So it's a great way to quantify some of those discussions where having different perspectives involved could actually help us with that quality of assessment. So that's a mechanism for helping make sure that we've got the highest quality assessments. In terms of documenting the decision, there is PowerNoodle has great reporting capabilities to export all of the information that we've obtained at different points in time in the process. And we're currently experimenting with other ways to use PowerNoodle to engage with decision makers once we've got materials put together to describe a decision when we're having those decision review board meetings. And we're exploring how else we might use PowerNoodle to engage discussions before those meetings.
Okay, thank you. Another question about when you have participants in these dispersed teams engaging offline, how do you drive them to use the tool, get the level of engagement when they're not sort of in the room together or doing this in a meeting?
That actually is one of the key art forms, and it can be, by the way, a problem. I've experienced it in one client where a lot of what the PowerNoodle team calls social loafing occurred. So you do have to create the right motivation, and often that helps to come from the key leader. In Chris's situation, I think it was very interesting that he was able to get very big, good participation. And how did you set that up, Chris?
We prepared people a little bit beforehand with a speech about the changing culture, and just that a key part of that is that if you're offered a voice, you probably should seize the opportunity to offer it.
I think that's a real key.
Okay. And then one other question, you talked a lot about globally dispersed teams, and Carl, I think you talked about sort of the potential broader benefit and application here, but are there times in which if you didn't have a globally dispersed team, you would still consider using a tool like this, and if so, sort of under what circumstances?
Jennifer, probably you're best to qualified for that. We have used it where even people use their smartphones for their input, and just about every meeting room has that now. So then it's a slight improvement because of the keeping a better record over using little stickies on the wall where you can also work in parallel. I think that the quality of being able to document quickly and walk out with a good sorting, there's still efficiencies there. What do you think,
Yeah.
Jennifer?
Yeah, in my mind, the whole business of having earlier input so that we can fine tune what we do in a meeting is one of the most powerful pieces. Whether people are dispersed geographically or not, the efficiency and effectiveness of meetings can be dramatically improved by using PowerNoodle, even if they're all in the same building. So I see a lot of benefit there.
Okay, and one final quick question, if you can answer it quickly, as we're almost at the top of the hour, is any thoughts on how, if people are interested in becoming using PowerNoodle and leveraging it in their facilitation, where to, at least first quick initial, where to go?
Well, answer the poll and we'll reach out to you. The SDG in its strategic alliance with PowerNoodle have an incentive to get others to use it, so we'd be delighted to be of help. But anyone can also feel comfortable directly going to PowerNoodle and having a demonstration and considering how they might become power users of PowerNoodle.
Okay. Well, on behalf of SDP, I'd like to thank our speakers. We're now at the top of the hour, and I'd pass it back to Brig.
All right, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's Learning Exchange. I'd like to thank our presenters for their time and contributions to today's event. I'd like to remind you that you may find the replay of this webinar and all previous webinars in the Society's member-only section of the website at decisionprofessionals.com. Thank you for being with us today, and you may now disconnect.